Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the third of our 5 webinars to advance cooperative development. The other upcoming webinars will be on real estate investment cooperatives and envisioning an equitable cooperative ecosystem. Recordings of the 2 previous webinars are on housing co-ops and on co-ops in the food supply chain are available on YouTube. Please see the chat functions for the links to those webinars. The USDA Cooperative Services Branch created a website in support of the Interagency Working Group on Cooperative Development. And Robbie, if you can advance the slide. You can see a picture of a screenshot of that website. The site highlights partners in the support of cooperative development at the federal, tribal, state, and local and private sectors. Links include funding resources, development tools, publications and information, and some success stories. The website is very much a work in progress, so please visit the website and provide us with feedback information for improvement. Next slide, please. Here is an agenda for today. First, we will have a welcome on behalf of USDA. Then we will have a representative of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve provide background on the child care system, current conditions going on. And then we will turn it over to look at cooperative solutions in providing child care. We will have 2 representatives from the cooperative community speak on the overview of the child care co-ops, and then a particular focus on worker ownership in child care. Then we will have a panel of federal resources for child care co-ops. We'll have a representative from the Administration for Children and Families and my colleagues at USDA Rural Development. And then finally, we will have some time for questions and your comments. Next slide, please. So next we will have Dr. Karama Neal. She is the Administrator for USDA Rural Development, our Rural Business Cooperative Services Branch, and she will share with us some opening remarks.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to have all of you here today. Really appreciate your willingness to come and talk about this really important issue. As we noted, this is a gathering of people both within and outside of the federal government, and that is what it takes to build a strong child care community. As a working parent myself, the daughter of a single working mother, and the granddaughter of a child care provider, I have directly experienced the importance of affordable, quality child care for both the child, the working parent or parents, and the larger economy in the community. The 2014 Farm Bill authorized the Secretary of Agriculture to chair this working group to ensure the coordination on cooperative development among federal agencies and private sector organizations. And we at the Rural Business Cooperative Service are honored to have such an important role in supporting cooperative development. This is because cooperatives generate jobs, bring needed goods and services to people, especially when there are market failures, and are resilient in economic downturns. Cooperatives can also create an ownership asset for the members, which is truly important, particularly in the sector. Cooperatives operate in all areas of the economy, as we know: agriculture, utilities, food service, energy, financial services, insurance, construction, housing, healthcare, and of course, childcare and early childhood education, which we're here to discuss today. Cooperatives of all forms, we just heard a mention of worker cooperatives, but also producer cooperatives, consumer co-ops, remain an important form of business because their form facilitates resiliency and can weather such economic shocks. This level of resiliency is particularly important given today's economic, health, and other shocks that we are currently in and may experience going forward. The member patrons of the cooperatives own, finance, use, and democratically control the cooperative. These financial benefits form the cooperative's main business, remain with the member patrons in the form of patronage refunds, and so stay in the local community where the members live. Since the cooperatives are democratic organizations whose members have a voice in how the business is run, cooperatives produce creative solutions, particularly in times of crisis. In the case of worker cooperatives, members can change their operations or opt to take smaller paychecks rather than dismiss workers or go completely out of business. They can change how they market and move quickly to take advantage of new opportunities. These values and flexibilities allow cooperatives to fill market gaps, address community needs, and particularly those that might otherwise go unmet. So we've convened this meeting today to foster cooperative development and ensure coordination with federal agencies and national and local cooperative organizations that have cooperative programs and interests. We hope this group can seize this opportunity today to make programs across the federal government better known, better understood, more used, and bring people within and outside of government together for greater synergy in cooperative development, particularly in the child care and early education sectors. We're excited for you to be here. We're excited to be here with you, and we look forward to this conversation. So now I'm pleased to welcome Benga Ajalor, who is a Senior Advisor for Rural Development. And so I'll turn it over to him. Benga.
Thank you, Dr. Neal. I appreciate that. If we could bring up the slides. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I appreciate being here to talk about childcare and childcare issues. So, given the group here, I don't need to go into too much detail about childcare issues, but one of the things I kind of want to focus on is that, we know that there's a lack of access to childcare throughout the country, and that the barriers when we talk about lack of access is not just monetary, but also the availability, because especially if we look at in a rural context. And so there was a recent study by the Bipartisan Policy Center that actually tried to quantify this childcare gap, and they find that there's a childcare gap of 31.7%. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that number is that 31.7% of children below the age of 6 with all parents in the labor force come from families without access to formal childcare facilities. And so that's, nearly a third of kids out there are not able to have formal childcare facilities, which is problematic. And so in urban areas, that childcare gap is 29%, in rural areas, 35%. And so, but the issue with childcare, and this is why, this webinar with cooperatives is going to be very useful, is that it's not just the demand for childcare that's at issue, it's also the supply of childcare. So here we're talking about formal childcare facilities, but we know that there's a lot of informal childcare facilities, but with some of those issues is that people who want to be in that childcare sector, a lot of times there's not quality jobs. They're low pay, they don't have benefits, and there's a lot of difficulties in terms of being able to just, have these facilities, have the kind of quality to be able to provide the quality childcare that people want to do. And so we have to look at it from both the demand side and the supply side. And so we also know that childcare is very important for a strong and resilient labor market and for a vibrant community. That we have strong childcare facilities, we have strong quality jobs in that childcare facilities. That's great for everybody. Go to the next slide. So Administrator Neal talked about the benefits of cooperatives in general and why they're so good. And so as I talked about, there's both the demand side and the supply side. And so one of the things that, and we're going to hear more about during this webinar, is that you have early childcare and education cooperatives can help build economic power. Individuals and worker cooperatives experience higher wages, less turnover, more sustainable jobs, and higher job satisfaction. So that we could, set up these cooperatives to help, with the supply of childcare facilities. Early childcare education programs can also be organized as multi-stakeholder cooperatives that brings together groups, parents, and workers together that are most involved in children's well-being. And so you have the decision-making that's on both the parents and the worker side to be able to strengthen that. So you have the quality jobs on one side and the affordability on the other side, and all together, again, creating that strong, viable community. And so, again, thank you very much for the invitation to speak. You're going to learn a lot more about these and how these work, and just looking forward to hearing more about this. And I'm going to pass it over to Ben Horowitz now. Thank you.
Oh, very good. So before Ben Horowitz speaks, thank you so much, Karama. Thank you, Benga, for the welcoming on behalf of USDA. So I wanted to just give a little tee up to what Ben is going to provide. Ben is a senior policy analyst at the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, and he will provide some introductory information about childcare itself. It's interesting that the Minneapolis Federal Reserve has a history of research on the return on investment in high quality early childhood education. So without further ado, Ben.
Thanks, Margaret. So as Margaret mentioned, I work in community development and engagement here at the Minneapolis Fed. So that means I have to give a disclaimer here as a result. The opinions I am expressing here today are my own and don't necessarily reflect those of the Minneapolis Fed, the Board of Governors, or any other part of the Federal Reserve System. So for folks whose head is already spinning, maybe from all these references to different parts of the Federal Reserve, my next slide might help. So the Minneapolis Fed is one of 12 regional Federal Reserve banks spread across the nation. We're the 9th district, which is the gold-colored swath at the top of the map here. I'm located in the Twin Cities, a metro that's home to about 3.75 million people. The next largest metros in our district have less than 300,000 people. So we've got 12% of the nation's land, but only 3% of its people. You can compare that to districts like New York or Philadelphia, where they've got something closer to 1% of the nation's land and 5 to 10% of the nation's population. So our districts are very diverse. The 9th district is very big and very diverse internally too, in just about every way you can imagine. We've got the Twin Cities, which is the 16th largest metro in the nation. When we travel in our district, we visit regional hubs like Fargo or Rapid City. We go to small towns with bustling main streets that have been revitalized by immigration. We meet with people from some of the wealthiest native nations on the continent and some of the poorest. Our boundaries contain boom towns and places that are struggling economically. So one of our jobs in my department is to understand how low and moderate income households specifically are able to participate in these local economies. We go around and we ask, what's keeping low and moderate income households on the sidelines? And how does the nation's credit and banking infrastructure support the needs of different communities within our district? This work ties into our dual mandate from Congress to pursue stable prices and maximum employment, and also into my department's specific function, which derives from the Community Reinvestment Act. I wanted to give you all this context because I want you to understand how meaningful it is when I say that despite the miles and diversity contained within our district and the range of topics we cover and hear about, childcare almost always comes up in conversations with local community leaders. So on the next slide, you'll see a graph that shows that our exposure to stories about childcare isn't a coincidence. So regardless of where you're at, you're likely to find stories about childcare providers with long waiting lists and frustrated parents who have to organize their whole lives around accessing care. Just as one example, we traveled across North Dakota earlier this month and met with about 45 community development professionals. Among other things, we asked them about the biggest challenges for people that still struggle to find work in that state's red-hot labor market, and for employers that are looking to grow or sustain their business. Childcare was mentioned over and over again, whether we were meeting with housing developers or workforce development professionals. And in my 6 years at the Fed, I've heard about childcare in some places you wouldn't expect, like a pork processing facility, and just about everywhere else, like chambers of commerce roundtables and meeting spaces at regional banks, tribal colleges, and hospitals. And people were talking about it before I got here too. And a little bit like Margaret said, I'll talk about some work that my former colleagues did here at the Fed 20 years ago on childcare that is still relevant today. That work was inspired by similar conversations in a world that hadn't yet experienced the Great Recession or the COVID-19 pandemic and the tragedy and disruptions those brought within the childcare sector. So that pandemic only grew, diversified, and amplified the chorus of voices in our district, talking about the ways parents' childcare challenges spill over into the economy as a whole. It's led to new conversations on the connections between childcare and the labor market. And the increased visibility and intensity of childcare challenges has led some of us at multiple Federal Reserve banks to form a cross-system working group on the topic. So if you aren't in my district, but you are curious about how the Fed might be involved in childcare in your area, there's probably someone local you can talk to, and I'm happy to connect with anybody after this event. I think I forgot to put my email on the slides, but you can find it pretty easily on our website. So our working group has put together numerous informational resources on childcare over the years. I'll put in a quick plug for fedcommunities.org and our own website, minneapolisfed.org, which are good places to start if you're interested in these resources in more detail on what I'm skipping through today. So as I mentioned before, the pandemic inspired many people to focus on childcare in a new way. More people are seeing the way childcare impacts local businesses, but they're also starting to think of childcare as a business unto itself, which it always has been. I'm going to focus on 4 data points that are helpful for understanding the childcare market. Then I'm excited to listen alongside you all to the perspectives of presenters who are going to talk about different approaches and resources available to address some of the issues I'll raise. So the next slide is a slide from a Benjamin that's all about the Benjamins. When people think of education, they often think of the K-12 system, which is largely financed by the public. Every parent in the nation expects access to a free public education system once their child is old enough. On the other hand, while there are public and nonprofit resources devoted to childcare, they're generally much smaller than the amount that is spent within the child care economy by parents. That's what this first chart here is about. It just drives home the point that the public sector is not funding the child care sector as much as that funding is coming directly from parents' wallets. Those working parents and guardians drive the demand for childcare, and when that demand goes unmet, there are parents and guardians who want to work but can't. The next slide highlights a couple things to consider about the interplay between parents' work experiences and childcare. So we know that most parents are employed or want to be. 94% of fathers are working or looking for employment, and 2/3 of mothers are in the same boat. While some parents certainly choose to stay at home, there's also a lot of evidence that when childcare access or affordability challenges a family, a mother is the one who is more likely to drop out of the labor force. Studies on childcare subsidy programs generally show that their availability increases labor force participation rates. So as childcare becomes more affordable and accessible, more people go to work. Figuring out the impact of the childcare supply and employment is a little trickier than some of the other stuff I'll talk about, but the chart on the right is one of the approaches that I find convincing alongside the rest of the evidence. It simply shows that areas with a higher level of childcare supply saw their labor force recover more quickly from pandemic disruptions. The chart on the left, meanwhile, shows that parents' labor participation decisions look different when children are at different ages. Simply put, it shows that parents work less and are paid less for the hours they do work when their children are younger. Part of the pay disparity is caused by the simple fact that parents tend to be younger. Though it doesn't always feel like our children do actually age at the same rate as we do. So by definition, you'll be older when your children are older. And as people get older, they tend to earn more money. But another big part of the equation is the childcare challenges parents face. First, parents need to find childcare that's available when and where we need it. Survey data tells us that parents make work decisions based on childcare availability, and that can impact both how much they earn and how much they work. If you can find it, childcare can be expensive. Federal childcare subsidies serve about 15% of the low and moderate income children eligible under federally suggested guidelines. Other programs like Head Start are also unavailable to all eligible families. So there are some universal pre-K programs out there in some jurisdictions, but they largely serve 3- and 4-year-olds. Everybody else is facing a market where the average parent pays about $11,000 per child per year, according to research by my colleagues at the St. Louis Fed. And that's for full-time care. That works out to about 15% of the median household income. How does the child care supply respond to this particular type of demand? Well, providers have to find a way to navigate parents' limited incomes while they're working in an industry where opportunities to innovate are rare. At the end of the day, one person can only care for so many children. And then there's the cost of finding and maintaining appropriate space, and that's just the beginning. So the next slide shows how central childcare wages are to childcare expenses, again, drawing on work from my colleagues at the St. Louis Fed. So this shows the relationship between the wages that childcare workers are earning and the affordability of their services for parents. Even though parents feel like we're paying high tuition rates, providers themselves are operating on very narrow profit margins with low staff wages, high turnover, and myriad other challenges. Add in the physical and emotional demands of the actual work of childcare, and it's little surprise that many childcare providers we talk to or survey describe difficulties finding staff alongside high levels of stress and burnout. This chart shows that the labor-intensive model of childcare businesses means that you can't really increase staff wages without also challenging affordability for parents. So the final slide here is a pitch on why this is important, even if you don't particularly like children. We always say this is for Scrooge before he has his Christmas revelation. So about 20 years ago, economists at the Minneapolis Fed were hearing similar conversations about childcare as we're hearing today. And they started looking into evidence on returns on public investments in high quality early childhood education. So some academics had the foresight to plan for research like this. So I emphasize for the public here on this slide because the benefits of high quality early childhood education don't just accrue to the family that's able to participate in it. The kids who are in stable, supportive, and nurturing environments benefit from the impacts of that environment well into adulthood. But the benefits to the public are also worth noting, which is what we like to highlight. So the original paper was based on experimental designs that, like I said, stretched back into the 60s. Thanks to those forward-looking academics, we're now seeing signs that high-quality early childhood development can actually benefit 3 generations: parents, their children, and their children's children. This chart shows how the children of the now adult former preschoolers from one high quality early childhood program are faring relative to some of their peers whose parents did not get access to that program because of capacity limits. And you see that the same sort of benefits that were experienced by the now parents when they were kids are continuing to show up in the data. So each of these outcomes is obviously great for the two generations of children who stayed in school longer, avoided interactions with the criminal justice system, and had more success navigating the job market. But again, it's also great for the public that invested in their early childhood education, because when a child needs fewer supports in the K-12 system, or when they're less likely to grow up and access the social safety net, and when they're more likely to grow up and earn more money, it means the public is spending less on the safety net and gathering more in tax revenues. So our math shows that when you compare the initial investment in these kids to the net benefit in a purely dollars and cents framework for the public over the lifetime of the kids, those benefits far outweigh the original investment and beat most other investments you could possibly imagine. So I hope I've done a good job laying out the challenges in the market today and giving you a sense of why this is an important issue, not just for individual families and children, but also for employers and the communities they jointly create. I'll hand it back over to Margaret now so we can all learn about exciting opportunities to support childcare from our other presenters here today.
Very good. Thank you, Ben. And that is so helpful to get that overview of the conditions in facing us with childcare, but also from an economic perspective. So now we are going to hear a panel of two people to talk about from a cooperative perspective and how the cooperative model can be used to help provide solutions for the provision of childcare. First up, we have Kim Coons, who is the Executive Director of the California Center for Cooperative Development. Kim is viewed as the expert when it comes to child care cooperatives. She's been working in this field for many years, and she really has a handle on some of the issues and has worked hands-on with a number of different child care co-ops. She has actually written several guides and books on the topic. So without further ado, I turn it over to you, Kim.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen here. Please let me know if things are not working quite right. So I'm just going to repeat basically some of the things that that have already been presented about this crisis. So I'll go really, really quickly so that we can spend more time talking about some specifics about the solutions. Basically, as previous Ben and Benga shared, we have this shortage of care, and we have this affordability issue. You can look at this affordability in different ways, and these are median figures for the specific ages, but basically childcare is among each household's highest income. The average is about 18%. Now that's going to vary a lot if you have a couple of kids that you're paying childcare for. And these ranges that I have for the different age groups, the infants, the toddlers, and the preschools, I don't know how they got them. I was just yesterday talking to one of our staff members who's coming back from parental leave, and his review of childcare for his 9-month-old was $3,000 a month. That was the most economical that they could find. That's pretty high. That would amount to $36,000. So you can imagine these medians are telling us, and these are figures from the U.S. as a whole, but it gets very expensive, particularly for infants. And you can see it goes down a little bit as we have care for toddlers and preschools, and I can tell you why that happens in a minute. Basically, the other problem also that's been shared is this inadequate amount of subsidy for parents. It's mostly, this is a private sector phenomenon. We do have some programs at the federal level and at the state level, but they are very, very inadequate to meet the needs of people who are eligible. So it's basically only about 13% of eligible households receive the subsidies that they would qualify for. And then we have the crisis that's also been shared on the worker side, and I'll just go through this really quickly. First, who are these workers? Well, most of them are women. 52% are moms, and 40% are people of color. And then let's look at the workforce. There's about 15 million people in this profession. And the pay and benefits are very low. In fact, childcare is among the lowest paid positions you can go into. People go into this field because they love kids and they love that kind of work. But can't overlook the fact that there's a racial gap. Even within these wages, people of color tend to be at the lower end of that wage gap. If we look at teachers, let's think about there are a lot of regulations around what the definition of a teacher is in a childcare arena. Most states require that a teacher be have a bachelor's degree, and yet the average wage is $18 an hour. The range is about 15 to 23. If we look at child care assistants, which also have education requirements, the average is about $14 an hour. And those assistants are earning anywhere from $12 to $17 an hour. It's a pretty stark reality of the situation, but let's look at what that translates to in terms of their living standards. 15% live below the poverty line. 37% of those are 200% below the federal poverty line, and only 15% have health insurance coverage. So it's a pretty sad state of affairs. Not surprisingly, this translates into some things that we find in the child care arena that really affect children and families, which is this fragile workforce. People can't afford to stay in these positions many times when they can earn the same or more by working at a fast food restaurant. Sometimes they have to go for that. This causes a lot of turnover in the workforce. So the range is 26 to 40%. Those are the average turnover rates, but in some areas, the turnover rate can be as high as 70%. Now, if you think about what that means for children, that means that kids are not having the same teacher, the same person that's caring for them at the beginning of the year, by the middle of the year or the end of the year, which is really, really hard on young children. So I want to really spend a minute looking at the economics of childcare. Again, this has also been covered, so I'm repeating it, and hopefully we'll get a good view of why this is such a crisis. So we have regulations in every state, and I have to say that a lot of progress. When I started working in this arena, I don't even want to tell you how long ago that was because it was so long ago. The issue was trying to make sure that we had quality care for children. Now, most states, because of those efforts, have very good regulations, but those same regulations that keep children safe also have to do with the economics, the fact that it can be so expensive, and that expense basically is borne on the backs of the workers in those childcare arenas. So the most significant of these regulations is the child to adult ratio. So the best way in a capitalist economy to save money is to economies of scale. Oh, let's just have a whole bunch of kids and very few adults. And of course, that would really erode the quality of care and not make it too pleasant for anyone in that situation. The other kinds of things that are involved in the regulations are, sizes of toilets and inside and outside space per child and so forth, which are also really important and can make it harder to make it inexpensive. So we have this economic balancing act. Basically, there's a limit to what parents can pay, and costs in these situations are typically controlled by underpaying are the caregivers. And this balancing act really requires some ways to look, how can we minimize these costs and maintain the quality? And so what I really want to focus on with David is really looking at how cooperative models can address these issues. So we can look at a number of creative options in cooperatives. And as we know, cooperatives really what we look at is who the members are. That's what determines who the focus in, who the decision makers are in these different models. So membership types, there's really 4 of them. One are the parents, where the parents of the children in the program are the members. Another one can be workers who the workers in the program have run the business and have the childcare business. Employers are also another membership type that we find in this arena. What I'm going to really advocate for, and what I have been in the stuff in my writing, is a multi-stakeholder, which is a combination of all these. As I'll explain, all of these groups share really acute need for childcare, quality childcare, and by cooperating together, they can really have the best circumstances to meet the needs of each individual group. But let's first, kind of cover these different, the structure and so forth of these models. So first, let's just look at the corporate structure. And this is and I'm going to focus on childcare centers. David's going to talk about family home care. I'm only going to focus right here in my discussion on those childcare centers. So the childcare center incorporates as a charitable nonprofit and operates as a cooperative. The membership still means democratic governance according to those membership groups. The board of directors, just like any co-op, establish the policies, and the board hires and oversees an executive director, or just a director is usually in the regulations. That's usually the director, and then that director, of course, is implementing the policies set by the board, managing the day-to-day operations, and hiring and supervising teachers and those assistants in the child care program. So I want to spend a minute talking about the nonprofit status, because I have been, advocating for programs to incorporate it as a nonprofit and operate it as a nonprofit and use these statutes rather than the cooperative statutes, because I think it's to the advantage of the program. My opinion is that cooperatives are not defined by the statute that people incorporate under. It's hopefully, I don't know if that sound was affecting everybody. So see, please let me know if hopefully
You're
that
okay.
stopped.
Go right ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So the Internal Revenue Service defines childcare as education, and there have been some significant lawsuits that have established this in the childcare arena. So because of that, most childcare cooperatives can qualify for exempt status if they use the nonprofit corporate statute in their state. And what I was about to say is that I think that a cooperative is defined more by how we operate than by the statute that's used. And that can be explained too by we have states that have no statutes for cooperatives, but we still have cooperatives. So I really recommend we're trying to address a situation where the bottom line is really, really tight, as we've been learning. And so we want to do everything we can to lower the costs, operating costs. And if we cannot pay taxes, that's a really, really significant way to minimize the costs. There are some things that you need to watch out for. You can't have a majority of members in the cooperative that have a financial interest. The advantage of having a charitable nonprofit, of course, is that you don't have to pay taxes. In California, the minimum tax for any corporation, and including cooperatives, is $800. That seems like a really low amount, but when you're talking about that really, really fine line, it's still an expense. And then there are some things that they may still have to pay taxes on above that. That charitable status makes the child care center eligible for grants and for tax deductible donations. Again, members are still governing the cooperative democratically. There can be no distribution of profits. Hey, no worries. There's no profits there usually. So members again receive service at cost, and that's still the focus of the using this statute incorporating. So, well, let's get to why a co-op. we could just have a nonprofit, right? Just incorporate as a nonprofit. Why do a co-op? And I think really if we're looking at a program that's going to best fit the needs of members, again, employers, parents, the worker, um, a cooperative's best situated to do that. So we can also reduce the cost of that care while maintaining quality. We know that caregiver attributes are really, really important. We want people who have experience and education in the needs of children. Those are really important. We want to pay attention to the ratio of the child per caregiver, and we want to make sure that it's developmentally appropriate. We know that those are the things that go into a quality program. We want stable, reliable care, and we want a program that's good for kids. I want to say another thing that really makes the co-op model particularly good in childcare is you have more stakeholders with increased interest when they're making the decisions in the program. So I'm going to just go into these different models and just kind of uh, do a little bit of more detail in these models. The parent cooperative, where the parent is the member of the cooperative, is really the most common form of childcare cooperatives, and they've been around a very long time. They date back to parent preschools and the recognition of the importance of early childhood experiences. You know, co-ops don't happen in a vacuum, and so around the 1920s, this is when we started to realize that early education with children is really, really beneficial. And so Catherine Whiteside Taylor was a professor, and she really wanted programs for children. Especially, she thought it would be good for moms also to have a little bit of free time and to have education. And she thought this is a really good way to do that. And so that's really the origins of the parent model. And this really grew very quickly across the United States. So we find associations and so forth. The members in this situation are parents who democratically govern the center. Traditionally, this has mostly been women, but we have a lot more parents also being involved, both parents and grandparents and guardians serving that membership role. And then they hire the child care director to lead and oversee the center. Parents often volunteer time in these centers, and that to some extent lowers the cost, but it also improves the quality of the care that children get. And really, what you get in these centers is this community of parents and teachers in which everything is really focused on the child. What we found in these parent cooperative, and also what we find is that we have a low teacher turnover in these programs. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit, because you improve that reciprocity of parents and educators and focusing on the children, and you also have then a lot more concern for what people are being paid and the working conditions in the centers. So I want to give an example. Hilltop Nursery School was founded in 1951. This actually started out as a preschool program in a park, just as a nursery school in Los Angeles. And as the times have changed, a lot of these programs that were focused on being nursery schools grew, and that's what happened at Hilltop. Is the model morphed to the needs of the parents. At Hilltop now they still have the park, but they have a huge, beautiful center that serves 44 children that are aged 2.5 to 5 years old in a program that operates providing care from 7 in the morning to 6 at night. At Hilltop, again, the parents are setting the policy and so forth and directing that. They establish it's very, very important to them to have a program that's diverse ethnically and economically. So they actually have established a sliding fee scale. They get grants on top of any subsidies that parents might be able to qualify for. And they also have a donation program that allows for a sliding fee scale that will allow that diverse economic diversity in the program. They also have part-time and full-time options. This is something that you find in co-ops that is different in other childcare centers. nonprofit and for-profit, usually the options that are available to parents are, oh, you can have half-day care, which would be from whenever the program starts to midday, or you can have it on the other end. You can have a part-day program that operates on midday to the closing of the program. Well, most parents might have a program if they don't need full day care, the timing of that, maybe an overlapping of a parent or guardian taking care of kids, or other things that allow, or a work schedule that is more diminished, allow for them to have part-time care. They can save on the expenses. What we have at Hilltop and a lot of the co-ops is that part-time care has a lot more flexibility in the time that people can use. So they're more likely to pay for the time that they need rather than a section of time that they don't that they won't not when their child will not be in the program. At Hilltop also, they have requirements for parent participation. Every family, they have a family evening meeting once a month. All the family has a meal, and then the children are cared for, and the parents have a meeting, and that's once a month. Parents are expected to volunteer 12 hours a year in the program, and they're expected to participate in one fundraising activity. Well, how that's really hard for working parents, no doubt about that. But at Hilltop, their philosophy is that we really want to create a community here, and the community is around the children, and we want to get to know one another. And this is how we feel it's important to do. And the parents that attend the program, this is their recreation also and their interest. So this is a quote that kind of exemplifies this their idea of strengthening families through the program at Hilltop. With family members involved, the transition from home life to school life is easier. A child's self-esteem is boosted, and both parents and child develop a dynamic learning relationship that carries over into the future. And we saw some of the statistics previously shared really bear that out. I started my co-op career at UC Davis, an extension program, a Center for Cooperatives there, and I was hired to work with childcare. So that's how I began my career in co-ops, and I did a lot of work with starting co-ops and also with helping co-ops that were established to grow their program, extend their programs to offer full-time childcare, and I would get a lot of inquiries, and there were very few resources. And so I wrote this book that was published in 2003 to kind of address that. So it's not a page turner particularly, I gotta say, but it has a lot of information in it. There's stuff on how to start it, and then information that serves as a resource for those programs, existing programs, in the questions that I got a lot. And so that's what I was trying to do with this book, is to address that. And one chapter is really heavy on the research, because I wanted people to be able to write grants to articulate why a co-op is good. There's a lot of research on parent involvement and its linkages to positive outcomes for children. And Ben really addressed a lot of that. What we find is a reduced parents involved in a variety of different ways in their children's lives can lead to decreased chances of kids getting involved in the juvenile justice system, reduced early age pregnancy rates, a lot of really positive things that we're able to control for economics and see these economic outcomes. Um, and then I did also research while I was at UC Davis about the co-ops that were in existence. I did a extensive survey, asking them a lot of different questions, and asking questions also of the people that work there. And really really my work and the survey really show that parents really learn in these caregiving situations in the co-ops. They learn from the teachers by being involved in the program in a really effective way, and those positive relationships, bringing the children and the parents and the caregivers together, just is a positive for everyone. Also found that we had a lot of that community aspect that you find that we found around being emphasized and nurtured at Hilltop really comes out to those lasting bonds. And also the caregiver turnover rate in the co-ops was very, very low. When I did the survey, it's way less than 0.5% of what you find elsewhere. So then we have employers are also these childcare stakeholders. And what we find are benefits to these employers. Childcare recruitment is increased, retention is increased. We have reduced absenteeism among workers. When you have childcare, it boosts company loyalty, it increases job satisfaction, and you find actually increased productivity. And there's research supporting all that. I want to just share a little bit about a couple of programs. GeoKids is actually a federal, these are federal employees in Menlo Park, California. Actually, this program was initiated by the parents. They wanted an on-site program for their kids. They provide 6 months through 4, 8 in the morning to 6 p.m. at night, and the parents get reliable quality care, convenience, community, peace of mind, and the employer gets that enhanced recruitment, retention, and reduced absenteeism. So on this, the parents are the majority of the board. There's one employer rep. The employer provides the space and reduced rent. The parents pay for the care. They require participation. And this is a quote from a parent. The real advantage is that my office is just 2 minutes walk from the center. Because it's a cooperative, we have a good knowledge of all the teachers and other parents. We know their children and they know us, and we're a real resource for one another. So sometimes parents, a center, an employer is not big enough to provide care on site or near site care for their employees. In this case, they can join together with other employers. This can also overlap with the parent model. This is a great strategy for employers that otherwise, for economics, for parent population, are unable to provide this service. Employers are able to share both the risks and the benefits, and this is rarely free, but the combined efforts of the employers can help reduce the cost. They can provide maybe a rent-free site, utilities, bookkeeping, accounting services, maybe meal services if it's a medical facility or other facility that provides meals anyway. Provide it to the kids, equipment sharing, and also benefits. They might extend the benefits for all the workers to the childcare workers at the childcare center. I want to just briefly, I'm running a little bit low on time. This is a frequently referred to great program in Hazen, North Dakota. I was involved in helping start this. Hazen had no licensed childcare. They had unreliable care. And so 8 employers got together to create Energy Capital Cooperative. They purchased a local church that opened in 2017. This program is licensed for 88 children aged infant through school age. It operates from 7 in the morning to 5 at night. In this case, the employers, the site is very, very low cost. The church was very happy that it went to a good cause, their church that was needed to close. The employers subsidize the director salary and benefits, and they commit to covering spaces for their employees, and they serve along with parents on the board. The worker cooperative model is, David's going to go into that. The only thing I want to say is that in the worker cooperative model, they're ineligible for tax exempt status because of if it's completely workers, they can't have a direct dividends and advantages to the employers. So this is why it's important to include employers, parents, and teachers, increase that stakeholder engagement, embrace that partnership that I talked about earlier, draw on the legacy of the parent co-ops, or it will be organized as a charitable nonprofit where 51% plus are the parents and employers. The focus is on this synergy of nurturing children and addressing the child care. One example of this program is the Children's Center at Stanford University. This started in 1969, one of those really early programs that was a preschool. It's now grown to having 210 children, infant through age 5, and they have both teachers and parents on the board. but 51% are disinterested parties, so it qualifies for that nonprofit status. The parents contribute 4 hours per quarter to the program, and the success of the program prompted the university to have to build a larger facility, and this is part of the whole campus. Outside people are also allowed to enter the program, and that's what made it so that they could care for 210 kids. So just in summary, I just want to say these are the operational facts. All quality childcare centers have high operational costs. For optimum effectiveness, childcare centers operate at cost, and then the unused slots are costly, so you always need to have a full program. That's why I always say don't limit who can come to the program, and increasing this diversity in membership really maximizes the effectiveness for the employers, for the parents, and for the teachers. And I just want to say there's more resources on our website. I worked with some other people to create this California Cooperatives landscape, and there's one section on childcare cooperatives. So thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you, Kim. That was fantastic. And a great overview of the flexibility of the cooperative model and how it's being used in various situations. Now we're going to have David Hammer. He's the executive director of the ICA group, and he is going to present information more on the the worker side of things. In particular, taking a look at home-based childcare along with the childcare workers themselves. So David, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Margaret. And thank you, Kim, for what an amazing setup. That was really incredibly helpful. And Ben for setting the facts, the baseline for this. So I just want to appreciate everybody. So as Margaret said, I'm the executive director of the ICA group. We're a national not-for-profit consulting firm focused on worker ownership. Our mission is to change the nature of work by advancing businesses and institutions that center worker voice, grow worker wealth, and build worker power. And we do that. One of the ways we do that is we focus on particular industries. And one of the industries that we focus on is childcare and trying to create more worker ownership in the space of childcare. I will say, referencing what Kim was talking about, I'm going to be talking about kind of like worker-owned companies here. But I think with all of these strategies, like as Kim said, this notion of the multi-stakeholder cooperative can fit into this. So this is not an exclusively a worker, just solely worker ownership piece. And I'm really going to talk about two areas. So one is going to be around kind of childcare center conversions, and the other around family childcare. So it's a lot to cover. So I'm going to go quick. Highlight here: people have talked about the challenges facing the childcare industry. I want to just sort of talk about two key things here that reference this. One is that the formal childcare workforce is actually shrinking. We have a situation where the childcare industry is not growing at the pace in which it's really necessary. And I think the other piece that's sort of worth noting here is around that owner retirement has a big impact on the national decline in licensed childcare centers. And when we talk about conversions, I think it's an important thing to note that baby boomers started turning 75 in 2021. That was the first year of the baby boomers turning 75. 10,000 baby boomers turned 75 every day. And that's going to continue until 2039. The majority of business owners, especially small businesses like childcare centers, are baby boomers. And so as they retire, right, the question becomes, what do they do with that business, right? Do they sell it or do they just close up shop? And what we find is that in too many cases, people are just closing up shop. And that actually what that does is it eliminates childcare capacity from the space. So when we look at kind of both childcare center conversions, we think about that both as like a way to build wealth and power and improve job quality for childcare workers, but it's also a way to help provide childcare, business owners and the communities. So you go to the next slide. We talk about in our work in addressing using childcare conversions or worker ownership conversions as a way to support childcare businesses. It's really kind of taking on these are kind of the things that we're really thinking about, right? One is responding to owners, owners who, especially as there's a lot of financial uncertainty, and you're an older business owner, the idea of taking on debt or the idea of kind of making the investment in a company is quite difficult because the return on investment is a short period of time. We also want to make sure that we're creating pathways for owners, those retiring owners who are looking to get out of this in a way that can ensure their legacy and support their business. And on the worker side, this is really about like engaging workers around saving jobs, right? Engaging workers around making sure that these jobs are saved, but also making sure that the quality of those jobs improve, and so we can retain them. I think it's worth noting a thing here is that so ICA has an affiliated loan fund called the Fund for Jobs Worth Owning. And the reason we call it the Fund for Jobs Worth Owning is because just because you own your job doesn't mean it's a good job. It makes it a better job, but it doesn't make it a good job yet. And so if you're a childcare worker and you own a job that pays you, slightly above minimum wage with no benefits, and an enormous amount of precarity because of the industry, you own a pretty lousy job. What we need to be working on is both like trying to address the challenges that are facing these folks, through transforming these jobs into worker-owned jobs, but also working to address some of the policy issues to combat some of these endemic problems. So it's a both and approach. And I think in our approach at ICA, one of the things that we really focus on is not just thinking about the firm, not just thinking about the company, but working to try to build networks to address some of those endemic and systemic problems. We'll talk more about that when we talk about the family childcare work, especially. So the next slide talks about how we think about kind of our process to help a business go through this conversion. And so I'm going to talk, briefly about kind of two conversions that ICA has worked on. But the way that we sort of take folks through a 5-step process as we're thinking about a business owner looking to see what's happening. The first is really establishing what are their goals. What is that owner's goal, right? Are they looking to sell the company and leave? Are they looking to sell the company and stay? Are they looking to sell all of the company? Are they looking to sell part of the company? What do they need in terms of what are their financial needs in terms of retirement? And what can, and how can this play a role in that? Really understanding that a transition from a conventionally owned or an individually owned childcare center or any business to become a worker-owned center requires that the selling owner wants to do it, right? So the first step we do is really figure out what is that owner looking to do, right? And that's not a long process, but it is a process really trying to hone in what are the things that person wants to achieve. Then once we have a sense of that, what we do is that we look at really okay, how does that work? And so that for us is really 3 parts. One is figuring out the value of the company, and then figuring out the financial feasibility of the company buying itself, and the operational feasibility of whether the company has the capacity to exist after the transition has happened. And so that'll often look at, if an owner's looking to leave, is there the staff in place to take over, or you're going to have to bring somebody in to replace them, or you're going to have to spend some time training folks up to do that. So it's really just doing kind of the math and the assessment to figure out is this thing a possible, is this process a possible, is it feasible? Is it possible? Can we get the financing? Can we figure out a way to make this thing work? Once we've sort of done that, then we can really say, okay, we think this is something that's worth going forward. We're going to bring it to the employees. We're going to bring it to the broader community. We're going to bring it out and really try to make this thing work. That's where we get into this planning the transition. And that's really when we start figuring out how to build out governance systems. We start involving lenders and figuring out the financing things of that. And the planning the transition and the completing the transition, one is sort of coming up with a plan, which is really building out all of the kind of what is the financial, transition going to be? What kind of banking we're going to need? But then we really are, moving into like, how do we get that, that transition completed? And then after that, it's operating as a worker-owned company, right? So this is kind of our process. It takes some time. And I want to talk about two examples of this. So the next slide talks about the Rose Garden. The Rose Garden is a company that converted to employee ownership. I wish I should have written this down, but about 7 years ago. And this quote is from the selling owner. And really, this was the situation where the owner was looking to sell the business. Her daughter didn't want to buy the whole business. It didn't sort of work. And they said, well, what if we looked at this? What if we looked at selling to to all the employees? And so that was a process that really worked for that selling owner. They got to achieve what they want. It worked for the sort of the next generation owner who didn't want to take on the responsibility of the company solely. And it created a pathway for folks to, to own their job and to work on trying to create, a better job for themselves. And they've been going, they converted a number of years before the pandemic. Had a difficult time, as folks, anybody's familiar with the childcare industry. The pandemic was incredibly challenging for the childcare industry. If we look at sort of the industry and we sort of take away the PPP loan program, we'd probably be looking at an industry that doesn't exist anymore. That most, lots of childcare centers are only here because of, the subsidies that they were able to get. So they had they struggled, just like everybody else through the pandemic, but made it through and have, reopened and are doing quite well today. The next slide talks about a more recent conversion out of Wisconsin, out of Milwaukee, called Nestling House. And here, this quote is from Lauren, one of the worker owners there. And, she talks about how not only is it sort of, allow the, the staff members the opportunity to co-own the business and make collaborative decisions, but this idea of like when you send your child to Nestling House, you will know the teachers want to be there because it's more than just a job, it's a community. This really kind of, I think, encapsulates kind of why the sort of this idea is, can really be valuable. I want to, before we transition into co-rise and the sort of talking about family childcare, I do want to sort of name that one of the challenges with childcare conversions, there's an enormous need and demand for this, but one of the real challenges with a childcare conversion program is that childcare centers tend to be pretty small. And as folks have said, childcare centers have really low margins. So these companies are not worth a ton of money, right? The value of the business is not worth a lot, is not that much. But because these childcare owners are also not making a ton of money, being an owner of the need for that, that money to make their retirement secure is even greater than in other situations. So the financial pressure on the transaction is really significant. And to be frank, the cost of helping a company transition through this is not insignificant. And so there is we really see that there's a huge need for this. There's a real demand for this. And it's, worker ownership transitions can be a real way to shore up the childcare industry. But it's not something that is, there's an obvious market for. And so there really is a market failure there in terms of childcare owners being able to afford to pay for these services. So A, they're not aware of it, but B, even if they are aware of it, it's quite difficult for them to cover those costs themselves. And so we really are looking at this as like from a public policy perspective and from a philanthropic perspective, we really think this is something that requires some pretty significant subsidy to help, support this work. So to transition here, next slide, talk about Co-Rise Cooperative. Co-Rise Cooperative is a cooperative based out of Chicago, Illinois. It's a cooperative of family childcare providers. So these are licensed providers who operate a childcare center inside or childcare location inside their own home. So they tend to be smaller. Some folks have assistants, some folks do not. And the challenge with family childcare providers face is that they are essential, but they're really not supported. Some examples of how that unfolds is there'll be required in-service trainings that people have to attend, and those services will be offered during the day. Well, if you're a childcare center and you are the owner and you are the only person to attend that training, requires you to shut down your childcare center. So you have to tell the children and the families that you're caring for, we're not going to be around. We can't do this. So we've got to attend this training. And you're not going to get any revenue for that, right? There isn't the same kind of flexibility that a center has because it tends to be a single person, right? Or two people, and there's not backup, right? So those are some examples. Another kind of example that we have that sort of is that, a key indication of some of these challenges is that family childcare centers oftentimes will, or family childcare providers oftentimes will offer care at really unusual times. So 24-hour care, overnight care. When you look at the pandemic and sort of how the pandemic unfolded, what you found was that it was family childcare providers who really stepped in to provide the care for a lot of frontline workers, especially overnight and late, kind of odd schedule folks. But we've run into situations where, in fact, the state or the payer will sort of refuse a payment because they're like, oh, we don't recognize time that's on Saturdays. And it's like, well, some working people work on Saturdays, and so they need childcare on Saturdays, and we offer the care on Saturdays, but the system isn't really set up for that, or the system isn't set up to be able to do odd hours. So there's a lot of systems pieces around family childcare that are disadvantage these providers. Another piece that I think is sort of worth calling out as a real challenge is there's a lot of grant programs, there's a lot of subsidy programs, there's a lot of really wonderful stuff happening available for childcare providers. But if you're a single person who is, running this company, and oftentimes these are folks who are running, even if you're just, providing care from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., right? You're working from 6 to 7 to 6 to 8. You're working these incredibly long days. And the idea that you're going to, have the capacity, have the skills, have the the awareness to be able to apply for some of these grants, it's really, the systems are really set up to be a real challenge. In fact, when Co-Rise first launched in Chicago, the idea that you could have you could run this program, you could do this as a family childcare cooperative. It was sort of like not within the regulations that you could even do it, and so we were able to sort of adjust those in a way that allowed it. But it was a real challenge. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about kind of like our solution, right? So what is Co-Rise? Co-Rise is a childcare cooperative of individual family childcare providers in Illinois. All the workers who provide care under the Child Care Assistance Program, the state subsidized child care program, are members of SEIU, and those rates are negotiated under a collective bargaining agreement. And so Co-Rise is actually formed in partnership with the union. In fact, their offices are based in the HCII, the SEIU offices in Chicago, and they have a really close working relationship. The union has played a big role in helping kind of help the co-op get off the ground, and provides both kind of financial and non-financial support for the cooperative. And so the cooperative is really connected closely with the union and really trying to provide kind of leverage that existing relationship to help provide power, influence for the for the co-op. So what do we do? Co-Rise, what does it do? It's right now, its main thing is it's a CCAP, which is the Child Care Assistance Program in the state of Illinois. It's a CCAP contractor, which means that it basically pays the providers. It acts as a contractor to pay those providers that fee. But we also are looking to We also provide business training, business supports, and are looking to sort of grow the number of businesses. If you think about what we're talking about here, is each of these individual childcare businesses is its own business. And so this is kind of like a shared services or marketing cooperative like Ace Hardware, that is taking small independent businesses and coming together to provide some back office services and supports to help these businesses thrive and be successful. And so the last slide just talks a little bit about what we're thinking about in terms of how Co-Rise is going to be going. So it started about 2 years ago. It's relatively small right now. There's 24 families or 24 providers that are enrolled. It's growing pretty consistently. But a big piece of this is around trying to work with the state and with the city and with the union to try to figure out how to raise rates. But I think another key piece here is that there are a lot of family childcare networks out there in the world, and a lot of them are doing really amazing and wonderful stuff. I think the difference between Co-Rise and some of these other networks is what it does is it centers the provider voice in both the governance and in the kind of business decisions. And by doing that, what winds up happening is that sort of little things wind up being adjusted in little ways to try to make this thing better for these providers. And really, when you kind of make business decisions centered around those providers, that business winds up being a much more responsive piece, and it focuses on the things it needs to, but sort of drops the things it doesn't. And so that was really where we sort of see the kind of the key difference here in Co-Rise as being something that when it's owned and when it's controlled by these providers, and the providers are really setting that voice, what it allows us to do is it allows us to build out systems and supports that are really meaningfully responsive to those providers' needs. And so that, I'm going to turn it back to Mark.
Very good. Thank you so much for that overview, David, and thank you for that important work that the ICA group is doing on behalf of childcare workers and home-based childcare providers. So now we have finished with the panel of people, cooperative experts, and now we'd like to turn it over to some federal resources that are available. And if we're talking about childcare, we need to include the Administration for Children and Families. And so we are fortunate to have Albert Watt here to talk about that organization.
Great, thank you, Margaret. And I know we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to try to be as quick as possible, but give you a lot of information in that short period of time. So again, my name is Albert Watt. I work at the Administration for Children and Families at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and really thank my USDA colleagues, the rural development colleagues, for inviting me to share some of our what's happening at the federal level in with federal child care and early education resources, and some of the priorities and opportunities that are coming up. So on this slide that you're seeing right now, the ACF, just a word about who we are. We're home to a number of programs that support families. In the Office of Early Child Development, which is where I serve, we have the Office of Head Start, Office of Child Care, Preschool Development Grants Birth through 5, and the Travel Home Visiting Program. And this slide really just shares our mission and vision and priorities that we're all working on at ACF. And as you can see, our vision includes what we want to see for children and families, but also more importantly, what we want to see for the early childhood workforce, who are really critical partners for parents and caregivers as well. I do also want to flag that this mission and vision are also very aligned with 2 executive orders that were signed early in President Biden's administration, the one on equity and the EO on improving the customer experience. Those are issues that hopefully you'll see how we're working on these issues in the next few minutes. On the next slide, you'll see that our top priorities, and I know this is a lot and it's kind of ambitious, but we want to continue.
Albert, you're on mute. There you go. Nope, you're still on mute.
I think I was muted. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Great. All right, sorry about that. So as I was saying, these are the priorities that we have at HCF. And I just want to highlight a number of them to this audience. The very first one is, of course, increasing families' access to early childhood programs, but also priority number 2, we also want these programs to be high quality, cultural and linguistically responsive, and also inclusive. And of course, health and safety, which is priority number 3, are paramount to everything that we do. And also compensation and pipeline issues, which is priority number 6. We are really laser focused on those issues, including recruitment and career education advancement for the workforce. And then finally, priority number 8 is also worth lifting up. It's really about, how do we center the lived experience of families and providers and children and everything that we do at ACF. On the next slide, I want to highlight 2 important demonstrations of support from President Biden for early care education that people might be interested in. First, in April, the president signed a sweeping executive order focused on care across the life cycle, young children, people with disabilities, and senior citizens. And really, this is a whole of government approach, meaning that more than 50 executive actions are to be implemented by HHS, our colleagues at USDA, some of whom are here, Department of Education, Department of Labor, the VA, Small Business Administration, and a number of others. We feel that it is very significant that almost all agencies are called upon to take responsibility for early childhood. And really of note that this executive order focuses both on making care more accessible for families and supporting the care workforce, again, which is really aligned with our mission, vision, and priorities that we just reviewed. And just goes to show that all the things that we do are really supported at the highest level of government. The next slide shows the other major commitment that we've seen from President Biden, which is his proposed FY24 budget, where he calls on Congress to make a historic $600 billion investment in early care education, as well as other discretionary funding increases for Head Start, childcare, and the Preschool Development Grant for 5. So these new investments would increase access to high quality childcare for more than 16 million young children and increase access to preschool for all 4-year-olds in the country. It would also improve compensation for the early care education workforce to enable better recruitment and retention. Again, this is the largest ever federal budget proposal that we've seen in early childhood, and that really, again, demonstrates a strong commitment from this administration. We know that also out there in the communities, people are worried about the American Rescue Plan dollars and other COVID relief funding running out, and the president and vice president have really pointed to this budget proposal for Congress to consider how to sustain those investments. On the next slide, we want to share a very exciting initiative, which is our new National Early Care Education Workforce Center. This is a $30 million investment to support research and technical assistance for states, communities, tribal nations, and local programs and territories to improve the recruitment and retention of a very diverse, qualified workforce across all ECE programs. You can see the QR code, and if you go there, you'll see the landing page for this new center, which will eventually become a more interactive resource hub. The center will focus the research and TA activities on 5 policy areas that you see on the slide that really make up a comprehensive strategy to strengthen the early care education workforce. And you also see on the slide the kinds of resources and activities they will be engaging in, and I encourage all of you to take a look at the website and to see what kind of resources supports might be relevant to your work. Also, on the next slide, we're glad to see that the impact of the COVID relief dollars in the early childhood education field. And people on this webinar have talked a lot about the challenges in the field in which they continue to be present, very present in the field. But we do think that these funds have been a really lifeline to families, children, and providers alike. So while the ARP passed over 2 years ago, and there is concern, again, these resources are running out, there is still funding available out there. We know that the stabilization grants alone from the ARP have now reached over 225,000 childcare providers and potentially impacting as many as 10 million children. And to just dig into those stats a little bit deeper, on the next slide, you see that states have been making incredible investments in the workforce wages and benefits, and also making childcare subsidy program work better for providers and families. So they've been lowering the cost of childcare for more than 700,000 children's families, and nearly 1 million workers have received some kind of compensation increase. And these are just early estimates of the impacts of these dollars as of June of this year. And we know that states are continuing to invest and innovate and make policy improvements for, that will improve children's, families, and providers alike. I can share a link also so that you can look into these data and keep track of how they are getting updated over time. And then to sustain the progress that were made possible by COVID relief dollars, the Office of Child Care just released a notice of proposed rulemaking with proposed changes to the Child Care and Development Fund. And these proposals are currently open for public comment. You can read more about it on the Office of Child Care website, and you can access it through the QR code, and there's also a link. You see things in there that will encourage or require states to do many of the things that they have been doing with COVID relief dollars, and many of the things that people have talked about today, such as improving access, increasing affordability, and providing financial stability for providers. The public comment period is open until August 28th, and please note that if you do want to make comments, you need to go officially to the official website, the regulations.gov website. So please do that through that portal. And then finally, I hope you check out our own ECD website, which includes consolidated resources on key topics like early childhood workforce, mental and behavioral health, and early childhood facilities. One specific resource that I think somebody already put in the chat is the Rural Facilities Guide that was developed in partnership with our colleagues at the USDA Rural Development Office. So that's it. I know that was a lot, and if you have any questions, please feel free to put in the chat or contact me through the email or phone number. Thank you very much for the time.
Very good. Thank you, Albert. And thank you for providing your contact information. I suspect there may be people following up. So very, very good. Thank you for that. We are running low on time. If people are able to stay for a few more minutes after our scheduled 1.5 hours, that would be terrific. I'm going to ask my colleagues at Rural Development, their presentation on rural business cooperative services, that the resources that we have, if you could be really, really, really brief, and just know that you can reach out to our team and we will get back to you for more information. So take it away, Debbie Rausch and Robbie Fauser-Fink.
Hi, good afternoon. To be brief, on the left side of your screen are programs that we felt could be accessed directly by cooperatives. I will make a misnomer that the community facility programs is not in the RBCS section, but could be helpful to a child care center. Either they could apply, or maybe the municipality where they live in could apply for that program. And Debbie, I'll let you go over the other slides.
And then the links that you see on the right-hand side of the screen are things that cooperatives would not directly be the benefit, or would not directly be the applicant for. Those are grant and loan programs, but they are ones that could benefit from it. They are intended to be seed stock for revolving loan funds. So this is would be gap type financing for cooperative daycare centers. So if you're looking for, small amounts for equipment, renovating facilities, those kinds of things, that's where these funds could come in handy. Each state has revolving loan funds in their state, and they can guide you to who in their state can provide those. And then down at the bottom, you'll see the Rural Cooperative Development Grant link. That is seed money that we provide to centers around the U.S., usually about 29 centers annually, that provide assistance to cooperatives and can help you get started. And then if you want to switch to the next slide, Robbie. And that again is just a kind of recap of the revolving loan funds. Go ahead and flip to the next one. This will give you some idea of the different types of projects that these types of funding will work for. So you don't see childcare on there specifically, but it is things like the small business loans, equipment purchase, gap financing that you would have if you're working with a commercial lender. And then there's some energy grants and things on there that could cover reducing the costs of operating through either providing better HVAC, insulation, solar, some of those types of things, so that the centers can avail themselves of the REAP grants. And I believe it's Robbie to turn over. Nope.
Sure. Well, okay, go ahead. Go ahead. We'll just be brief because we can just kind of fly through these.
Yeah. Basically, we wanted to give you kind of a little feel for what the co-op section does. We work with the centers. We are very well connected with the centers that provide technical assistance. We also have co-op development publications, which you can find both on the Rural Development Cooperative webpage or also through the Interagency Working Group's website. And then we have some presentations that we have done over the past year and a half or so. And those are recorded, and those are also housed on the Interagency Working Group. And then these are kind of links to some of the introductory publications for cooperatives. So if you want to get just a background on that before you jump into whether or not it would be a good fit for a center to either transition to one or to start up a new one, that's some helpful information there. And then next slide.
Yeah, and these are just our websites here. We're going to give these this presentation to the attendees. So, you know, it's our cooperative services, interagency, and then our publications. And if you want to join up for Gov Delivery, and this one is more program based, you know, rural development or state office contacts, business energy, and then an eligibility determination tool to make sure that the project is eligible for your area for that specific program. So Margaret, I hope we've kept it brief enough.
Yes, that was a very brief. So we have a few minutes. If people are willing to stay on, let's go ahead, and if people have questions or if they want to make comments, feel free to either put it in the chat or unmute yourself and ask the question. You could raise your hand and I'll call upon you. And the raise your hand function is at the top, along the top right-hand side.
And if you're shy, you can, put it in the chat.
If presenters want to ask questions, Elias Krim, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for some great information. I was taking notes all the way along here, really good stuff. About a year ago, a group of friends and I got very interested in some work that John Rostakis did around social co-ops. And this was kind of a mystery to me because, as I guess everybody here would agree, we don't have any. We don't have social co-ops in the US, not in the European sense. So I'm part of a little team that's working on a study, a comparative study, sort of inspired by John's work, looking at Emilia-Romagna, Quebec, and South Korea. And what we're trying to figure, it's a feasibility study. And I guess our goal, which we're still sifting through, is to ask the question, are social co-ops on these other models, such as in Italy, for example, feasible? Can you do one in the US? How would you do it? And, you know, what other considerations would you have in terms of sort of location, industry, you know, childcare being prominent in this group? And so one thing that I noticed in the research is, and most of you will know this too, is that in these other contexts, there are back-end organizations. There are consortia, as they call them in Italy, which make it actually a fairly easy thing to start a childcare co-op. You're not on your own. You're joining a whole ecosystem, which seems to me one of the key missing pieces for sure. We don't quite have that yet, although we're grateful to ICA group for going down that road, getting close to that. And then the other piece I would say is that since we don't have models to replicate, is it a matter of using the nonprofit model to come as close as we can in this country? Would that do the same thing? The overall goal being just to address the fact that according to the data, the highest quality social care available in the world today is through these kinds of multi-stakeholder organizations in a number of countries. But as I say, we're looking in particular at the Emilia-Romagna region, Quebec, and South Korea. Just hoping anybody might have any comments on that.
Thank you for that, Elias. Would anyone like to attempt to address social care, the social economy, multi-stakeholder cooperatives being used in the social economy, and what it takes to really pull that off well? I'm going to put David Hammer on the spot because he's one of those forward-thinking folks.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Elias, I think what you put out a really thoughtful and important question, which is like, what are the ways that we can, what are the ways that we can in the United States leverage some experiences from other places? I think what's when I look at kind of the social co-op space in the U.S., or not the social, but sort of the equivalents of the social co-ops, you see things like the the sort of employment social enterprise space, which tends to be more nonprofit. I think, to me, though, what one of the key distinctions and the key differences there, and this is, I think, one of the things that Kim was highlighting in her presentation, is the importance of stakeholder voice in key decisions. That when I look and say, what's the real difference between Co-Rise and other networks? Co-Rise is controlled and is accountable in a meaningful way to actual providers. Whereas in a nonprofit, if the members, if the workers don't play a role in sort of selecting that, choosing that board and playing that role and doing that, then there's not that accountability. But as Kim laid out, there's lots of ways to create meaningful accountability for stakeholders, using the nonprofit model, using the multi-stakeholder model. And so in that sense, I think it's a place where I think we have a long way to go. But I also think it's a place where, I think one of the key, especially in Italy, one of the key players in sort of setting that piece was the government, right? That it was a question around it was about setting the policy that we're going to be trying to do this, and there were funds available. And if we're talking about trying to address the social sector in the United States through these models, the amount of funding that's necessary to make a dent is, I think, is pretty significant. But I think that there's time and again, when stakeholders have meaningful accountability, or when an entity is meaningfully accountable to the stakeholders, lo and behold, it provides better services at lower cost. Because business decisions are based around kind of taking to mind, those stakeholders. So I think it's absolutely an area we need to be doing, pushing more of, here. And we've done a lot of work in sort of the nonprofit employment social enterprise space at ICA over the years. And it's when workers or worker groups have meaningful say in sort of that governance, the mission of that organization tends to be, stronger, and those community connections are stronger. And that is something that really, I think, drives innovation and quality. So I'm grateful you guys are doing that work, and I appreciate it. I'm excited about reading it. So.
And I think it also, David touched upon Emilia Romagna doing that type of work and bringing the stakeholders. I believe the province of Quebec took a similar approach in identifying some key industry sectors that had some market failure and that had some market that had frankly had some opportunities, and bringing together the various stakeholders, including the provincial government, to put an emphasis on that. We here in the U.S. had a similar situation when it came to electrifying rural America. So,
Paul has asked a question about other programs like Co-Rise. Do they exist in the United States?
So there are a number of groups that are doing childcare networks, family childcare networks. In terms of cooperatives, there are not a lot. There are two that we know of, Co-Rise, and then a group called the Family Childcare Coalition in Philadelphia, with a slightly different focus. But there are groups around the country that are doing, some really interesting and exciting work around, shared services networks. I think some of those are doing, have a really kind of a system in place to have meaningful accountability from from providers. So it's a catch as catch can. Like some of them I think are doing really amazing stuff, and some things are doing amazing stuff with provider voice. It's hard to know from the from the outside sort of what is the role of provider voice in shaping those systems. And that's that's kind of what we like about the cooperative model, is if it's a cooperative of providers, and maybe other stakeholders as well, but it's a cooperative of providers, then at a minimum you've got providers playing a role. But there's not a lot. It's certainly an area we want to be doing more of. So
Albert, go ahead.
Yeah, I was curious to. This is fascinating because it's not an area that I have dug deeply into. I was wondering if David, in terms of these family childcare cooperatives, and how they center the interest of the providers, how important it is for there to be a union presence. I know the Chicago one you said they would develop with a partnership with unions. Is that necessary, or is that something nice to have but not critical?
I would say that it's a nice to have. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. So in the case of Illinois, the benefit that we had with Co-Rise in Illinois was that as Co-Rise has been hiring staff, there was a real push to hire only people with experience having been a family childcare provider. And so what Co-Rise was able to do was it was able to advertise those jobs to the 8,000 family childcare providers that SEIU represents, and only those folks. And so all the folks who work at Co-Rise have direct experience having been a family childcare provider. So we have sort of, in that sense, the union relationship gives them an unfair advantage, I think, over other folks. So it's great. But it's certainly not, I wouldn't describe it as like an absolute necessity. In fact, the other group that we work with, FC3 in Philadelphia, is, it does not, they have a connection through to a union, but not in any kind of the same deep way. So it's more about like, let's be opportunistic and try to seize upon whatever relationships we can, is really the sort of what drove that. So
Very good. Thank you for those observations. I am not sure, are there any other federal agencies on the call that would like to say a word? We had Dr. Joseph Blassie on the call, and unfortunately, he just left. It would have been nice to have had him. He's out of Rutgers University and also at Treasury. Yes. So yes. Anyhow. So you know what? I'm going to put Kim Coons on the spot to give a final word, because Kim has been has been active in the field of childcare and cooperatives for many decades, and I think it would be helpful for her to give us some final thoughts.
Oh, thank you. What I want to say is that I think there's a lot. I am really happy that there are so many people interested in attending this program, and to say that there's a lot in the works. Charlotte from the University, from the Center for Cooperatives at Nebraska, and I are working together on developing a video funded with USDA Rural Development funds about childcare cooperatives. And I think these videos like that are really, really helpful, especially when you can see kids and you can see programs. So I think there's a lot of stuff in the works, and hopefully let's keep this going. Let's get more information and more development in the works on these co-ops.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending, and we invite you. Please know that this meeting has been recorded, and the slides have been compiled, and it will all be available on the Interagency Working Group for Cooperative Development. It may take a few days to get the recording up, but it will be there and for posterity. We would invite you to join us for the Real Estate Investment Cooperative discussion that will be happening on Friday, September 15th. And we've got some great examples from the co-op community, and looking forward to a fruitful discussion with sister agencies in the federal family. So thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you to our speakers. Wonderful job. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everybody.